Welcome to the first of the play-along series for Kanjira. They're going to be short pieces and loosely classical, traditional in nature. Now I need to explain a little bit about how South Indian solo structure works for percussion before we get into this, and I also need to talk a little bit about syllables and some of the ambiguities and complications there are in employing syllables from the parent drum mridangam on instruments such as Kanjira or Ghatam, where there aren't that many sounds. So first of all, I want to talk about solo form. I'm going to try and do it as briefly as I can, but I'm going to do another video at some point on comparing North and South Indian solo structure, the way that it works in performance. But to summarise it very briefly, South Indian percussion solo involves you're starting out with a basic groove. Where let's say we're in 8 beats Adi Tala. You'd have the basic groove, and then you sew themes into that groove flow, and then you bring those themes in more and more regularly until you end with a large composition based on the themes that you've sewn into the rhythm, for example. So in the lesson we're going to be looking at today, the play along today, the basic groove is the very common Adi Tala groove. Ta dim na ta ta dim na keda taka dim na dim dim nam taka dum ta dim dim na dim dim na ta dim dim na ta dim dim keda taka dim dim. So that's the groove. That's the first groove. Normally the first groove that a South Indian percussionist will play when they're creating a solo, when they're starting to develop a solo. That's a very strident, it's very definitely laying down a foundation, almost like a kind of quarter note, sort of solid foundation to build on. And then they'll introduce themes into it. So in the instance of, let's use a different theme, because I'll come around to the actual theme we're going to be using. The theme could be, for example, ta dim na ta ta dim na kita dim na dittum kita dim. So that's the phrase they've introduced. Dittum kita ta dim na dim 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 na kita dim na dittum kita dim ta dim dim na dim dim kita dim na dim dim. And so they'll start introducing the theme and some of the little modular parts of that theme that will get used in the final composition, called a corvoy. So what will happen from then, in this point, they've introduced the theme, they've got the rhythm going. There'll be someone on stage clapping a time cycle. Now, in this instance, the time cycle is clap, finger, 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 clap, wave, clap, wave. 8 beats. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there'll be someone on stage clapping that. If it's a singer, then they'll be doing the time cycle. If it's say violin, for example, and percussion, then there'd be another person on stage specifically just to clap the time cycle. It's that important in the way everything's hung on that time cycle, all the rhythm work, everything that happens. So you've got the time cycle going on, you've got the rhythm has been stated, the theme has been introduced, and then it's what's called korepu, which basically means reduction. So if we had that phrase, what din da 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 dim na kita dim na dittum kita after that, that's at the end of the cycle, it would be more frequent. So da dim na dittum kita dim na dittum kita more and more frequent. So this is a very simple phrase and a simple time cycle, just to explain how it's working. And then when they've done that, when they've introduced the theme, they've established the rhythm, introduced the theme, done the reduction, the kore pu, introduced the theme more regularly, then they'll have the concluding ending. So, I mean, it was a very, very simple. Very simple ending. There are a lot more complicated endings than that, and we'll be looking at some of those in these play-alongs. So that's how it will start out. And then, you know, if it was just a soloist, then they would do, you know, maybe do another version of the same thing, as in establish the same rhythm, a different theme, a different ending, and then they might move on to, you know, a different groove level. Dum dimmy num tut num dimmy num tut num dimmy num ketaka dum dimmy num tut num dimmy num ketaka dum dimmy num tut num dimmy, or dum tut tut dim tut tut dim tut tut dim tak ketaka dum tut tut dim tut tut dim tut tut dim tak ketaka dum, or num tut num dim num tut num dim num tut num dim num tut num dim num. So these are some basic groove levels into which you know, a theme would be sown, and then, or introduced, and then a conclusion. So that's the basic structure to begin with. They'll be laying down these rhythmic foundations, introducing rhythmic themes, and then resolving them with, you know, poetic compositions, normally involving patterns of rhythm repeated 3 times, designed so as to end on the downbeat. We'll get into all that later on. Now, if this was a group solo, then what would happen is that each percussionist would take their turn. So percussionist A would play the foundation rhythm, and then a composition, you know, to resolve that. Then person B would do the similar thing. Then person A again with a different rhythm and a different theme. Person B, different rhythm, different theme, and they'd kind of work their way together towards the next section of the solo. Now, if that was a group solo, then that would involve a question and answer where the phrases get shorter and shorter. And you know, a soloist can also do a similar type of thing with different phrases. Again, it's called a kore pu, where they're reducing phrases and then building up to more of a you know, a rolling, drum rolling type thing. Dum, da-da-ga-da-ga-dum, da-da-ga-da-ga-dum, da-dum, da-da-ga-da-ga-dum, da-da-ga-da-ga-dum, da-dum, da-da-ga-da-ga-dum, 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 ga-da-da-ga-dee, ga-da-da-ga-dang, ga-da-da-ga-dee, ga-da-da-ga-dee, ga-da-da-ga-dang, ga-da-da-ga-dee, ga-da-da-ga-dang, ga-da-da-ga-dee. And then when they're at this level, they start to do rolling and embellish that, get some different accents in, different phrases, and then they'll build up towards what's called a mora and korvoy ending. And mora is a very specific composition. I'm going to cover that in one of the konnakol explanations elsewhere on my YouTube site. And at a later date, we'll get round to doing mora for Kanjira as well here. But anyway, they'll do that, and then they'll do a big elaborate composition to end with. So that's kind of the structure of a very, very brief explanation of the structure of a South Indian solo. And so the next thing to go on to is the phonetics. Okay, and that's, you know, it confuses people a lot because it's complicated. Now, if you let's just boil it back down to being on the parent drum, the mridangam. Now, obviously, there's so many different sounds on that drum that the syllables can easily, you know, represent all of those sounds. Similarly, on the tabla, you know, you've got the sound on the rim of the drum is na, the inner rim is tin, the sound on the black spot, the gab, is te, the open bass sound is ge, the closed sound on the bass tabla is ke. You have ge on the bass tabla and na together, and that's da. You have get and one of the close sounds on the black spot, te, then that becomes de. So basically you have a whole really elaborate language that's come from all of the different sounds that are on the drum, combined in lots of different ways to make other sounds, and it's an absolute thing. I mean, there's a lot of ambiguities in that as well, but put simply, you know, you can imagine the complex language of South Indian percussion could easily be represented on a drum such as the mridangam, where there are so many different sounds and tones. But of course the Kanjira and the Ghatam, not so. Obviously it's really got two sounds, but the syllables that you learn are the syllables from the parent drum, the mridangam. So you might have dittum kitataka tigutango kitataka, but you're going to play it, you know, just on two sounds. And so, I mean, some people have tried to make a language for Kanjira. The specific notes are, but you know, it's silly really, because the language from the mridangam is so amazingly rich and complete that why would you want to change it? And you know, there's only two sounds on the Kanjira pretty much anyway, so you know, just you've got to learn those syllables. And so what that means when you're learning the Kanjira, and it's why I haven't really gone too far into the syllables so far, because I want people to get some technique together, and then you can start to go into the you know, the ambiguity of the syllables, and you know, what they mean and where they come from, and how confusing it is to recite them on the Kanjira, because there's only two sounds on the Kanjira, and dozens of different syllables that you can find, you know, in mridangam compositions. So even with this composition that we're going to be looking at today, there's a lot of ambiguities with the syllables, but really the syllables are just a guideline. So with many compositions, Kanjira players would recite the same syllables but play something completely different. So it's something to not be too hung up on. You know, you can kind of read between the lines with it all, really. So the main rhythm for this, ta, dim, dim, na, totally open. I'm not doing any pitch bend. Ta, dim, dim, na. That's the core of it. Just 4 quarter notes. Ta, dim, dim, na. Second time, ta, ta, dim, dim. Third time, kitataka, dim, dim, na. Dim, dim, na. Ta, dim, dim, na. Ta, ta, dim, dim, na. Kitataka, dim, dim, na. Dim, dim, na. Ta, dim, dim, na. Ta, ta, dim, dim, na. Kitataka, dim, dim, na. Dim, dim, na. Ta, dim, dim, na. Ta, ta, dim, dim, na. Kitataka, dim, dim, na. Dim, dim, na. Ta. So that's the basic groove. Now, you know, as I've said in some of the other lessons, it would never ever be played exactly like that. You know, when, even though that's the kind of level, that's the vibe of the main groove, a Dingan player would be ta, dim, na, dim, na, dim, dim, na, dim, dim, nam, ta, dum, ta, dim, na, dim, dim, na, dim, dim, na, ta, ta, dim, ta, dim, ta, ta, dim, na, dim. Very, very, you know, kind of moving around it, in the same way that I said, if, you know, if you had 8th notes written out on a drum score, you're not just going to do that on the hi-hat, you know, and expect to keep the gig. So it's this is the guideline rhythm. For this one, I'm just keeping it straight for the first play along. So, you know, it's easy to follow. So you can easily see the fingering. Ta, dim, dim, na. No pitch bend needed. Ta, dim, dim, na. Ta, ta. The second time, ta, 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 dim, dim. Third time, kitataka, dim, dim, na. Dim, dim, na. Ta. So then we're going to have the theme that's coming in, and this is where the first vocal ambiguity comes in. Now, the theme is very, very simple in comparison to what we've been doing in the lessons so far. ta ta tum tum ta tum tum ta tum. That's the theme that's coming in. Ta ta tum tum ta tum tum ta tum. Now they're the syllables that I'm going to use. They're the syllables that I've written in the notation. But actually, it would always be recited as ta ta kuku taka dinner tom. Ta ta kuku taka dinner. Not ta ta tum tum ta tum tum ta. I'm doing ta ta tum tum ta tum tum ta simply because it's easier to understand what's happening. So you'd have the theme would be introduced as I explained earlier on towards the fourth quarter of that. Ta dim na ta ta dim na kita taka dim na ta ta tum tum ta tum tum ta ta dim na ta ta dim na kita taka dim na ta ta tum tum ta tum tum ta. So that's the theme introduced. So then you have the korepu, where the theme is introduced at half intervals to that. So ta dim na ta ta tum tum ta tum tum ta ta dim na ta ta tum tum ta tum tum ta. The next part. This is a very easy play along, trust me. Ta ta tum tum ta tum tum ta tum. Ta ta tum tum ta tum tum ta tum. Ta ta tum tum ta tum tum ta tum. That's the ending, the final part. Ta ta tum tum ta tum tum ta tum. Ta ta tum tum ta tum tum ta tum. Ta ta tum tum ta tum tum ta tum. So this is a good play along just to explain the framework and have something that's not too challenging technically to play. So that's basically the structure of it. The last part would be called an arudi in South India. There are numerous names for it actually. Through the lessons, I'm going to generally refer to it, those thrice type phrases, as T-highs because it's more commonly known. Obviously that's a North Indian phrase, T-high, but I think it's very clear what it is. So basically it's a phrase repeated 3 times and it ends on the downbeat. So 6, 7, 8. Ta ta tum tum ta tum tum ta tum. Ta ta tum tum ta tum tum ta tum. Ta ta tum tum ta tum tum ta tum. Recited at half speed, so it's easier to understand. Then at double speed. Ta ta tum tum ta tum tum ta tum. Ta ta tum tum ta tum tum ta tum. Ta ta tum tum ta tum tum ta tum. So you see the third tum becomes the downbeat of the rhythm, and so it's a T high. It's a rhythmic cadence repeated 3 times. Whatever that is the best way for you to understand what it is, but it's a super important device in Indian percussion and Indian rhythm, like phrases repeated 3 times, sometimes very, very long phrases. 3/11s, for example, is 33, so that's landing on the downbeat after 2 bars of 16 or 4 bars of 8. So we're going to get a lot into that later. So for now, that's the bedrock of this play along. So I'm going to put it up on the screen and play along. 3, 4, and ta dim dim na ta ta dim dim na ta 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 dim dim na dim dim na ta dim dim na ta ta dim dim na ta 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 dim dim na dim dim na ta dim dim na ta ta dim dim na ta 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 dim dim na ta ta tum tum ta tum tum ta ta dim dim na ta ta dim dim na ta 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 dim dim na ta ta tum tum ta tum tum ta ta dim dim na ta ta tum tum ta tum tum ta 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 dim dim na ta ta tum tum ta tum tum ta 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 tum tum ta tum tum ta tum ta ta tum tum ta tum tum ta tum ta ta tum tum ta tum tum ta tum. 3, 4, and ta dim dim na ta ta dim dim na ta 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 dim dim na dim dim na ta dim dim na ta ta dim dim na ka ta ta dim dim na dim dim na ta dim dim na ta ta dim dim na ka ta ta dim dim na ta ta tom tom ta ta dim dim na ta ta dim dim na ka ta ta dim dim na ta ta tom tom ta ta dim dim na ta ta tom tom ta ta dim dim na ta ta tom tom ta ta tom tom ta tom ta tom ta ta tom tom ta ta tom ta tom ta ta tom tom ta ta tom